Oscar Piastri took home a very controlled win at the Belgian Grand Prix with yet another McLaren 1-2. It is the team's 10th win of the season, their 6th 1-2 of the season as well, and also a 3rd consecutive 1-2 starting from the Austrian Grand Prix. In terms of the Drivers' Championship, Oscar now has a 16-point gap ahead of Lando, which in the context of this championship is basically nothing because it just means that one DNF could potentially swing the entire title fight over the course of one race. However, in the Constructors, the fight is completely over with Ferrari more than double the points behind McLaren. McLaren are guaranteed to basically win both titles at this point, with the only question being whose name is going to be on that Drivers' Championship trophy at the end of the season. Yet again, just like in Silverstone with Piastri's penalty, it was the smallest of mistakes that seemed to decide the race winner between Lando and Oscar. In terms of pace, it seemed to me that both of the drivers were almost identical throughout the weekend, and ultimately both of them, in my opinion, had the pace to win the race. Piastri had the advantage early in the weekend with the sprint, setting a lap record in that qualifying session, with Norris in the qualifying session for the Grand Prix coming out on top when it mattered most. The rolling start should have been an advantage for Lando because it allowed him to dictate the pace through Sector 1 and also allowed him to replicate the conditions of the race, which, as we saw in the sprint and the Grand Prix, was very difficult to overtake in. However, he chose to start very early and crucially made a mistake into T1 when he covered the inside line a little bit too much to block off Piastri, which ultimately compromised his run up the hill. Those are the margins that are deciding the race winners in 2025, which shows just how equally matched Lando and Oscar are, because Oscar, as we have seen many times at Spa on lap 1, including in the sprint to himself, took full advantage of that opportunity, overtook Lando for the lead at the end of the Kemmel Straight, and before we even got to the end of Sector 1 on the very first lap of actual racing, that decided the Grand Prix winner. The different tyre strategy between the two drivers, Lando's slow pit stop, and also the few mistakes that Lando made in chasing Oscar, I don't think really mattered that much because even if Lando had caught up Oscar with 2, 3 or 4 laps to go, catching and overtaking are two very different things, and as Oscar showed at the end of the race where even on his worn mediums, he was still able to put in some really fast lap times, Oscar had more than enough pace and tyre life in the bag to defend from Lando. And now, before we move on and delve deeper into McLaren, I do want to say a quick thank you to Odoo, who are the sponsor of today's video. Odoo is the all-in-one business management platform that allows you to run every single aspect of your business with over 40 different apps, which includes creating an online presence for your business. The website builder has been designed to be incredibly intuitive, meaning that you don't need any technical skills or prior experience to build the perfect site. All you have to do is enter the industry that you work in and the goals that you want to achieve with your site, and Odoo will tailor a website specifically to your needs with numerous design options and a wide range of features to fulfill the needs of any business. Using Odoo's very simple drag and drop system, the options for customization are endless with the different text, logo, animation, and effect options available. The best part about Odoo is that to get started, it's absolutely free. With their one app free plan, you can start designing a website for your business at no cost right now. Start using Odoo today, completely free, using the link below, and see how it can help you accelerate your business. And now, it's difficult to know exactly who has the momentum between these two drivers because every single race seems to hinge on one pivotal moment, whether that's a penalty or a mistake. Even in Austria, when Oscar was battling with Lando, Oscar basically had just one lap to potentially overtake Lando, and he never again got even close for the rest of the race. All of these small mistakes where both of the drivers have left results on the table and have arguably not fully capitalized on the performance advantage of their car has created a narrative on social media that I have started to see more and more, that basically drivers like Max primarily would be making so many less mistakes and would be making the McLaren look a lot more dominant. And I've also seen a lot of people say that the intra-team title fight this season between Oscar and Lando is actually boring compared to the domination that we have seen by Max over the past couple of years. To defend McLaren and their drivers a little bit, as I mentioned at the beginning, they have won 10 out of 13 races this season, and if you kind of extrapolate the first half of the season, then they will potentially win 18 races, with the other teams winning 6 as a collective. That is still an unbelievable season for any team in Formula 1, and even if you look at the races that they did lose, Japan was definitely the drivers under-delivering in qualifying, which allowed Max to take full advantage with an absolutely sensational lap. In Imola, let's not forget that Piastri was on pole position, and it was just that one moment of brilliance by Max jumping Piastri with a great overtake at the beginning of the race that sealed the race win. And then in Canada, although Lando didn't help matters by driving into Oscar, Mercedes were genuinely fast that weekend, with George capitalizing on their performance, and even Kimi scored his one and only podium in that race. The point is that I think a lot of people are starting to over-exaggerate exactly how much McLaren has actually left on the table. If you look at Max's domination in 2023 with a dominant car and 2025 at McLaren with their dominant car, the circumstances of their individual success is just very different. I have no doubt that Max would definitely have more race wins than either Norris or Piastri in their situation, but to me that's almost an unfair comparison because, for one, Max Verstappen is the best driver in Formula 1, he is the benchmark, and so, in a way, no one could have more success in any situation than him. And then secondly, given how complex these cars' driving characteristics are, and how difficult it's been for drivers like Sainz and Hamilton to adapt when they have moved to different teams, you also can't guarantee that Max will 100% like the way that the McLaren drives and will be able to extract 100% of the performance out of that car. Something else that I think is very important to remember is that the dynamics at these two teams is just really different. Red Bull has a 1-2 dynamic with a very Max-centric environment. I mean, the team Verstappen and his dad has so much say and so much presence at the team, and that has been created by Horner and Marco. Lando and Oscar and their respective people around them just do not have that kind of say, they do not have that kind of voice inside of the team, and even though Red Bull is very similar to what Schumacher had at Ferrari, it puts Max in a very comfortable place mentally, and it also takes a lot of pressure off his shoulders. At McLaren, as is their historical philosophy, Zak Brown has always wanted the two absolute best drivers possible to push each other, as well as score the most amount of points for the Constructors' Championship. Lando and Oscar aren't maximizing the car's potential as individuals because, as a collective, there is just a lot more pressure and competitiveness on their shoulders inside of the team, knowing that although yes you do have a performance advantage, you also have an equal teammate who could beat you, and that naturally just leads to more mistakes. Even if you have a dominant car, intra-team battles bring with it a totally different level of pressure, a totally different environment, and sometimes even paranoia inside of the team because each driver wants to have equal treatment across the board, and more importantly, they want to beat their teammates at all cost. That paranoia even exists amongst the fans. There is now Zak Brown memes about how much he celebrates when each of his drivers win a Grand Prix, and that is the level of scrutiny and paranoia that Zak Brown is trying to deal with. The comparison to McLaren I think has to be the Lewis and Nico years at Mercedes, and this is where the argument that perhaps McLaren's domination even with their two drivers is a little bit boring I think does hold some weight, but for very specific reasons. Toto tried and failed to control Lewis and Nico because there was a pre-existing relationship that turned toxic, which then also started to destroy the team from within. Whilst Andrea Stella has been left to simply run the team on the ground as the team principal, Zak Brown as the CEO has specifically tried to create an environment in which both Lando and Oscar can continue to compete for championships for years to come without creating toxicity inside of the team, which potentially could force one of them out. The reality is that in Formula 1, the most entertaining driver lineups are basically always the ones that are quite short-lived. Whilst there is definitely competitiveness, so far there has been absolutely no needle or toxicity between Oscar and Lando, and even their one crash in Canada was actually quite tame because Lando took instant responsibility. All of that creates a more cohesive and harmonious environment, but it also creates a bit more of a boring title fight. McLaren and Zak, by design, are trying to create a more boring environment that is solely focused on winning and that will hopefully have a lot more longevity than Lewis and Nico did, and to their credit, even the drivers have totally bought into this so far. compared to Lewis and Nico, who also left results on the table because they were more focused on not losing to each other rather than just maximizing as a collective, created a more entertaining title fight because there was so much more history and so much more toxicity both on and off the track. The 2025 cars and their characteristics have also played, I think, a massive part in there being just less actual racing between Oscar and Lando for Grand Prix wins. The final year of these regulations has created some of the fastest cars we have ever seen in Formula 1, hence the lap record around Spa last weekend, and because we have more downforce, there is always going to be more turbulence, which just means it's even more difficult to follow. I talked about this at the beginning of the season, but it really does seem that drivers who lead at the end of the opening lap almost always go on to then win the race. The 2021 cars, which were also at the end of a generation, they are a little bit weird in the sense that, yes, we had great racing throughout the field, but there was also a massive decrease in downforce because there was a reduction in the barge boards for that season, which massively slowed the cars down. To me, I think that it is just too easy to take for granted that we actually have a title fight on our hands. Yes, there are other drivers who perhaps would be even more dominant in that McLaren, but I don't think that will mean that whoever does win the title at the end of the season is not a worthy winner. Just as Max and Red Bull deserve their success, given how bad McLaren were 10 years ago, their resurrection has been nothing short of remarkable, and they as a team deserve all of the success that they are having right now. Lando and Oscar look like they'll take the title all the way down to the final race in Abu Dhabi, and even if they aren't the two outright best drivers on the grid in the absolute best car on the grid, surely that doesn't matter because this title fight right now is exactly what we all want to see as fans in Formula 1. Well, there you have it. Once again, a big thank you to Odoo for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check out their link at the very top of the description. And if you do want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated. And I'll see you in the next one.